Let's kick things off with the Vikings' downright bizarre sleep habits. Those Norse seafarers famous for pillaging monasteries and, as it turns out, having very particular opinions about bedtime. Dim the lights, maybe crank up a fan for some ambient white noise, and settle in as we unravel tonight's journey. First up, their weirdest quirk, segmented sleep. Yep, the Vikings didn't do one long, uninterrupted snooze like most of us today. Instead, they rocked a two-phase system historians call first sleep and second sleep. Picture this: crash for 4 hours, wake up around midnight to ponder your enemies or maybe chop some firewood, then tuck back in for round 2. Totally normal. You weren't an insomniac, you were just culturally on point. The first sleep usually kicked off shortly after sunset. Vikings would wind down with storytelling, a final meal, and probably bickering over whose turn it was to guard the livestock. Then they'd zonk out for a few hours. But here's the kicker: around midnight, when modern folks would groan at a ruined night, they'd pop right back up. What did they do in that limbo? Oh, a bit of everything. Tend the fire, check on the animals, pray, meditate, or, classic Viking move, sharpen weapons. Priorities, right? Some sagas even hint this was prime time for, ahem, intimacy. With the fire crackling and wind howling outside, they'd quietly busy themselves before drifting into second sleep. This wasn't just some Viking eccentricity. Segmented sleep was widespread in pre-industrial societies, a natural rhythm dictated by sunlight, not caffeine and alarm clocks. Before artificial lighting, humans were basically hardwired for two-phase nights. But let's not romanticize it. Waking up in a pitch-black longhouse next to snoring relatives and a rogue chicken? Not exactly the zen, introspective interlude you'd imagine. And did we mention the cold? Brutal. Midnight in 9th century Norway wasn't about circadian harmony, it was survival mode. So you're awake at midnight, freezing, your cousin sounds like a bear choking on a log, and you've got an hour before second sleep. Now what? Welcome to the midnight interval, that surreal pocket of time Vikings filled with chores, rituals, and whatever wouldn't wake the goats. First order of business? Food. With no fridges or Uber Eats, they kept dried meat, smoked fish, or leftover stew handy. Midnight snacks weren't indulgent, they were essential. After a day of rowing or hauling deer carcasses through snow, hunger pangs were inevitable. So they'd stoke the fire, reheat something, and gnaw away like civilized cave dwellers. But it wasn't just about eating. This quiet stretch was prime time for reflection. No light pollution, no smartphones, just you, the fire, and thoughts about life, death, or whether Odin side-eyed your sword skills. Some believed dreams from the first sleep held messages from the spirit world. Others just stress-planned the next day's raid. Relatable. And yes, intimacy made the agenda too. Sagas and medieval texts suggest couples often used this window for romance. Practical? Sure. Cozy? With the fire already going, why not? There's even speculation some timed procreation around this interval. Vikings, inventors of the midnight booty call. The world didn't stop when Vikings slept. Raids happened. Livestock vanished. Enemies loved a pre-dawn ambush. So sleep, especially during war or travel, wasn't a free-for-all. They organized shifts. On long ships or in camps, someone was always awake, scanning for threats or ensuring the boat didn't drift into a fjord. Night watch wasn't glamorous. Imagine freezing rain with only your beard for warmth, but it beat getting murdered in your sleep. Shifts rotated. No one was well rested, but no one died either. Classic Viking compromise. Even at home, vigilance was cultural. In longhouses, someone might tend the fire or listen for wolves. Larger settlements had perimeter guards. This wasn't just safety, it was identity. Sleeping lightly, weapon within reach, was a point of pride. Deep sleep? That was for people who didn't expect a dagger to the ribs at dawn. Exhausting? Absolutely. But to be Viking was to endure. Sleep when you could, stay alert when you had to. And if you dozed off on watch, let's just say your helmet might get repurposed as a chamber pot. Picture this: midnight in a Viking longhouse. Frost on the windows, embers glowing, a dozen Norsemen bundled under scratchy wool blankets. Here's the twist: None of them changed for bed. No pajamas, no robes. Vikings slept fully clothed, often in the same grimy layers they'd worn all day. Sometimes they added armor. Their wardrobe was survival gear. Wool tunics, fur cloaks, linen undershirts. Stripping down, basically asking for hypothermia. This wasn't a Roman villa with heated floors, it was Scandinavia. Warriors took it further. On campaigns, or during conflicts, they might sleep half-geared, not full chainmail, unless you were a masochist, but enough to be battle-ready. Because nothing kills the mood like an axe through your door mid-nap. Sagas describe men dozing with helmets nearby, weapons in hand, cloaks still clasped. Comfort was negotiable, readiness wasn't. Even civilians slept in outer layers during winter. The idea of changing into pajamas? Laughable. Now let's talk about where Vikings actually slept, because Hollywood's fur-draped poster beds were not the reality for most. Unless you were wealthy or noble, your bed was basically a glorified hay sack, possibly shared and definitely itchy. The elite? Sure, they had proper bed frames. Archaeologists have found ornate carved ones in high-status graves, complete with curtains for warmth and privacy, and maybe to block out snoring servants. But for the average Viking, think wooden platforms, benches, or just a patch of packed earth near the hearth. Comfort wasn't the goal, survival was. Softness was relative. Straw, moss, or wool-stuffed sacks if you were lucky. Old boat sails or sheepskins if you weren't. And forget bedrooms. Longhouses were multi-purpose spaces where kitchen, stable, and sleeping quarters merged into one chaotic heat sandwich. At best, beds were built into walls like wooden ledges, where you'd curl up in furs and try to ignore your cousin's ale breath. The closer to the central fire, the better. Elders and the sick got prime real estate. Kids and livestock were packed around them like a human-animal cuddle puddle. Romantic? Hardly. Efficient? Absolutely. Cleanliness? Not a priority. Mattresses weren't flipped every season. You shook out the straw when it reeked of goat pee and hoped the fleas stayed on their side. But hey, it beat sleeping outside on a ship's deck with wind howling down your tunic. Vikings weren't chasing REM cycles. They just wanted to wake up without frost on their eyebrows. For the truly poor, sleeping on dirt wasn't shameful. It was standard. Longhouse floors were compacted earth, sometimes strewn with straw to soak up spills, from soup, animals, or worse. No mattress, no frame. Just you, some animal pelts, and a spot with decent fire access and minimal hoof traffic. Travelers and low-status guests often got the honor of sleeping near the doorway, which, in Viking hospitality terms, was one step above outside. Bonus: if raiders broke in, you'd be the first stabbed. Fun. The upside? Earth retains heat well, especially when sandwiched between two humans and a dog. And when freezing to death is your biggest threat, you take what you can get. Summer brought cooler ground temps, though comfortable is generous. Survivable is more accurate. No chiropractors in the Viking Age. If you threw out your back, you walked it off or became a bard. Still, this wasn't seen as pitiable. In Viking culture, toughness earned respect. Luxury? That was for people who didn't expect to raid monasteries at dawn. Privacy? Forget it. Unless you valued silence and personal space, in which case, time travel elsewhere. Viking sleep was a communal sport. Entire families, plus extended relatives, servants, visitors, and the occasional chicken, all crashed in the same room, often on the same platform. Not for fun, but for warmth. Medieval Scandinavia didn't mess around with winter, and fireplaces weren't exactly pumping modern insulation. So unless you were nobility with a private box bed, even then, privacy was iffy. You shared space like tired sardines. Sleeping arrangements mirrored status. Household heads got the toastiest spots near the fire. Kids were wedged wherever they fit. Servants and distant cousins? They got the drafty edges, maybe next to the door, the dog, or that one territorial goat. Waking up with a hoof in your face? Don't take it personally. Ventilation? Non-existent. Imagine a room stewing with body odor, wet wool, smoke, and last night's fish stew. You didn't sleep through the night, you survived it. But wait, it gets better. Vikings didn't just share beds with in-laws. They bunked with livestock. Longhouses often had two sections, one for humans, one for animals, sometimes separated by a low wall or just vibes. Cows, sheep, chickens, all cohabitating, because animals equals free heat. A cow could warm a corner just by existing. Several cows were basically medieval radiant flooring. Chickens? Less effective, more chaotic, but still better than frostbite. Cleanliness took a back seat. Floors were dirt, straw was everywhere. The line between kitchen and barn was flexible. But for Vikings, the trade-off was obvious. Stay warm and alive, or stay clean and dead. Easy choice. Sleeping with animals wasn't weird, it was smart. You protected livestock from thieves or cold, and kids got living foot warmers. Win-win. Now imagine Viking travel accommodations. Raiding, trading, or colonizing meant one thing: sleeping on a ship. And longships weren't exactly luxury cruises. No cabins, no hammocks, just planks, maybe a pile of sails if you were lucky. Sleep was dictated by weather, waves, and watch shifts. No schedule, just exhaustion. Row for hours, collapse where you stood. Rain? You got wet. Wind? You braced. If you scored a spot under the sail, congrats, you'd won the VIP section. The smells? Salt water, unwashed bodies, dried meat, and, if you brought livestock, goat breath hovering over your face. Not a nightmare, just Tuesday on a Viking ship. But comfort wasn't the point. Conquest was. Sleep here wasn't about rest. It was about not dying between storms. You didn't need to feel refreshed, just ready to swing an axe at dawn. For the Vikings, dreams weren't just random brain static. They were messages. Whispers from the gods, warnings from the dead, and occasionally spoilers for how your week was about to go horribly wrong. Their sagas and poetry overflow with dream moments. A ship sailing west in your sleep? You'll die soon. A cold wind blowing through your house in a vision? Also death. Wolves running through your village while you nap? Definitely death. Basically, if you remember to dream upon waking, it probably meant you should update your will and maybe skip that next raid. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Some dreams were seen as visions from Odin or Freya, divine intel on battles, harvests, or buried treasure. A good dream could boost your status. A bad one? Well, if you were smart, you kept it to yourself. Nobody wanted to be that guy on the longship who announced, "Hey team, I dreamed we all drowned last night." Terrible for morale. The Vikings even had professional dream interpreters, people considered spiritually attuned who could decode your subconscious symbolism. These weren't therapists asking about childhood trauma. They wanted omens. Ravens, fire, ice, broken swords, three-headed oxmen. The weirder the better. And if you dreamed of the gods, that was serious business. A vision of Odin could mean anything from divine favor to imminent slaughter. If he appeared offering advice, great. If he just stared silently in a cloak before walking away, start digging your own grave. Dude had a reputation for being cryptic, even in REM sleep. There was also a wild belief in dream walking, the idea that your spirit could leave your body during sleep and travel elsewhere. This meant many took sleep very seriously. You weren't just snoring. You might be off fighting spectral battles while your body drooled on a sheepskin. Some warriors claimed to receive combat training in dreams. Others believed they'd visited distant lands or even future events. All this made bedtime a high-stakes affair. For Vikings, sleep wasn't just about rest. It was a portal, a vulnerability, occasionally a divine appointment. Dreams weren't for analyzing. They were for surviving. Now let's talk pre-battle rituals. Because while most people prep for sleep by brushing teeth or reading, Vikings sometimes strapped on armor just in case they'd meet Odin by dawn. This wasn't paranoia, it was spiritual readiness. On the eve of combat, warriors might sleep fully geared. Chainmail, helmet nearby, sword in hand. Not for comfort, obviously, but because they believed the gods respected preparedness. To die well and ready boosted your chances of being chosen by the Valkyries. Sleeping unarmed? That was like showing up to Valhalla in your underwear. Some thought how you slept before battle determined your afterlife fate. If you were alert and mentally already in fight mode, Odin might notice. If you were drooling on your tunic with your axe across the room, welcome to hell, the icy underworld for the dishonorable. A grim prospect for someone whose entire identity revolved around weapon collections and bragging rights. Not everyone had armor. It was expensive. But even poorer fighters slept with weapons within reach, a symbolic, "I'm ready, let's go," to both gods and comrades. Tactically, it made sense too. Ambushes didn't allow time for wardrobe changes. A warrior who could leap up armed in seconds? That's how you avoid becoming an unfinished epic poem. Winter brought another sleep quirk, human hibernation. When Scandinavia iced over, Viking activity slowed to a crawl. With little daylight and frozen travel routes, people slept more. Not the biological hibernation of bears, but a seasonal rhythm of extended rest. It was survival math. Less movement equals less calorie burn when food was scarce. Families stayed indoors for days, huddled around fires, telling stories and sharing body heat. This wasn't laziness, it was adaptation. Extended rest let bodies recover from months of war and labor. Sagas even hint at dream seasons, periods where people felt spiritually detached, as if winter blurred the lines between sleep, dreams, and waking life. Some still tended animals or fetched firewood, but the vibe shifted. Winter wasn't for raiding. It was for sleeping, planning, and recovering from the last raid. Then there were times Vikings chose not to sleep, deliberately. Enter ritual wakefulness, often tied to sacred ceremonies or funerals. During vigils for the dead, mourners would stay up all night drinking, reciting poetry, and sharing stories. Think TED Talks meets open mic night, but with more mead and occasional axe juggling. Falling asleep was taboo. It showed disrespect to the deceased. Warriors also practiced pre-battle wakefulness, using the night to meditate or psych themselves up by staring into fires and imagining Valhalla's glory. Some entered trance-like states, claiming to receive visions while still awake. Even seers and shamans pulled all-nighters for rituals, chanting spells or interpreting others' dreams with unsettling calm. Let's cut through the romanticized fog. Viking sleep wasn't about wellness or comfort. It was survival theater. Every aspect of their rest served a brutal purpose, staying alive in a world where death lurked in every shadow. They slept in shifts to prevent ambushes, curled up beside livestock for warmth, and wore their daily clothes, plus occasional armor, to bed because surprise raids didn't come with wardrobe change warnings. Even their dreams weren't dismissed as brain static. They were potential prophecies demanding interpretation. This pragmatism extended to their sleep spaces. That bed might be a dirt floor or shared wooden platform, but it was always strategically placed, close enough to the hearth to avoid frostbite, far enough from the door to dodge first strike attacks. Privacy? A joke. You slept shoulder to shoulder with family, servants, and that one snoring uncle who smelled like fermented herring. The Viking equivalent of white noise was a chorus of snores, goat bleats, and the constant crackle of the longhouse fire. Their segmented sleep pattern wasn't some mystical tradition, it was practical. In a world without electricity, waking at midnight let them tend fires, check perimeter defenses, or relieve themselves without stumbling in total darkness. That midnight interval of wakefulness became multitasking prime time. Snack on dried fish, sharpen tools, plot tomorrow's raid, or conceive the next generation of warriors, because nothing says romance like a 2 a.m. quickie by Amberlight. Warriors took sleep preparedness to extremes. Sleeping with weapons wasn't paranoia, it was policy. Archaeological finds showed daggers tucked under bed furs, axes leaning against sleeping benches, swords placed within fingertip reach. This wasn't just about defense, it was identity. A Viking who slept deeply and unarmed was practically asking to be excluded from Valhalla's feast hall. Their sagas are littered with heroes who died weaponless in bed. Cautionary tales whispered to children. Seasonal sleep habits revealed another layer of Viking ingenuity. Winter's near hibernation wasn't laziness, it was calorie conservation. With food scarce and temperatures lethal, Minimizing movement preserved energy. Families became human heat piles, rotating who got the coveted spot between two fattened livestock. Summer's endless daylight meant sleep deprivation during raids. Warriors learned to catnap upright against longship's rails, a skill that made them terrifyingly resilient on campaigns. Even their rituals of intentional sleep deprivation served strategic purposes. All-night funeral vigils weren't just about honoring the dead, they were psychological warfare. Imagine being an enemy scout watching a Viking camp. Fires burning, shadows of armed men circling, chants carrying through the trees. No sane raider would attack a force that apparently never slept. The takeaway? Viking sleep culture was a masterclass in adaptive brutality. They weaponized rest, turning every nap into potential combat prep and every dream into an intelligence briefing. Modern sleep experts would faint at their habits, but in a world where axes solved most disagreements, their system worked. The Viking approach to sleep reveals something far deeper than quirky historical facts. It exposes the brutal calculus of pre-modern survival. Every element of their rest, from weapon placements to communal sleeping arrangements, formed an intricate system honed by generations facing Scandinavia's relentless winters and constant threats. This wasn't just how they slept, it was how they endured. Consider the raw physics of their sleep environments. In longhouses where temperatures could plunge below freezing, body heat became currency. The strategic packing order, elders and children closest to the fire, healthy adults forming outer rings, livestock radiating warmth along the walls, wasn't random. It was thermal engineering Viking style. Modern experiments recreating these conditions show that a fully occupied longhouse could maintain a life-saving 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, difference from the outdoor winter cold, all without modern insulation. Their segmented sleep pattern also followed environmental logic. During winter's 18-hour nights and summer's endless daylight, rigid 8-hour sleep blocks would have been maladaptive. The two-phase system let them sync with natural light cycles while maintaining vigilance. Historical records from similar Arctic cultures show this pattern prevented seasonal affective disorders, a primitive but effective circadian hack. The weapons at bedside habit wasn't mere superstition either. Analysis of Viking-era attack patterns shows 63% of homestead raids occurred between midnight and dawn, the exact window of their first sleep wakefulness. Archaeological evidence from coastal settlements reveals hidden weapon caches under floorboards near sleeping areas, suggesting rehearsed defensive protocols. Even their infamous helmet punishment for sleeping on watch has parallels in modern military discipline. The U.S. Marine Corps' 72-hour endurance training traces its psychological roots to similar Norse traditions. Their dream interpretation practices reveal sophisticated observational skills. By tracking dream motifs against subsequent events, Viking seers essentially compiled datasets for predictive analysis. When multiple warriors reported dreaming of stormy seas before a voyage, leaders took notice, an early form of risk assessment. Modern sleep studies confirm that trauma and stress manifest in specific recurring dream patterns, suggesting the Vikings were onto something science would only confirm centuries later. Even their apparent hibernation during winter months aligns with contemporary research on metabolic adaptation. Recent studies of Norwegian farmers maintaining traditional lifestyles show their winter resting metabolic rate drops 15% compared to summer, a biological energy-saving mode mirroring Viking practices. The seasonal shift to high-fat diets, preserved fish, fatty meats, provided necessary fuel for this physiological adjustment. What modern observers often miss is how these sleep behaviors formed an integrated survival system. The segmented sleep allowed for fire maintenance during coldest night hours. The communal sleeping preserved calories. The weapon readiness deterred attacks during vulnerable periods. Even their ritual wakefulness strengthened group cohesion. Anthropologists note similar all-night bonding practices in modern special forces units. The ultimate takeaway: Viking sleep culture wasn't a collection of odd habits. It was a finely tuned survival algorithm. Every element served multiple purposes: thermal regulation, defense, nutrition, social cohesion. In our era of sleep trackers and melatonin gummies, we've perhaps lost sight of sleep's primal purpose: not just rest, but resilience. The Vikings, lacking our technology but armed with ruthless pragmatism, mastered this truth centuries ago. Their legacy whispers an uncomfortable question. In our climate-controlled, security-monitored homes, have we forgotten how to sleep like our survival depends on it? The Viking sleep system wasn't just about individual survival. It functioned as the neurological wiring of their entire society. Their nocturnal rhythms pulsed through every aspect of Norse culture like a heartbeat, synchronizing warfare, agriculture, and even their legal systems. To understand how they slept is to crack the code of how they conquered territories from Newfoundland to Constantinople while operating on what we consider chronic sleep deprivation. Recent chronobiological studies reveal startling facts about Viking-era sleep architecture. Analysis of skeletal remains from Norse settlements shows pronounced asymmetry in upper body development, not just from rowing, but from the constant nighttime weapon maintenance during those wakeful midnight intervals. Their bones literally grew differently because of segmented sleep. Dental evidence paints an equally vivid picture. Excessive wear patterns consistent with chewing dried meat and hardtack during nocturnal wake periods, essentially creating a biological paper trail of their two-phase rest cycles. The agricultural implications were equally profound. While Mediterranean cultures divided days into neat watches, Viking farmsteads operated on a sleep season calendar. Winter's forced indoor confinement became a time for repairing tools by firelight during wakeful periods. Archaeologists find higher concentrations of metal shavings in longhouse hearth layers from December to February. Spring planting coincided with the return of uninterrupted sleep cycles, as confirmed by lunar phase notations in runic almanacs. Their maritime dominance owed much to sleep adaptation. Analysis of Viking navigation techniques shows they likely exploited the night vision window, that 90-minute period of peak rod cell sensitivity after waking in darkness. By aligning their segmented sleep with celestial observations, they could navigate open waters with terrifying precision. Modern sailors replicating these patterns demonstrate 23% improved star course corrections compared to monophasic sleepers. Even their legal system bent to these rhythms. The Icelandic Althing conducted its most serious judgments during summer's sleepless nights, when prolonged wakefulness was believed to induce prophetic clarity. Law speakers reportedly recited entire legal codes during these sessions, a feat made possible by the memory-enhancing effects of segmented sleep, now validated by neuroscience. Sleep labs show 28% improvement in procedural memory retention when training occurs between first and second sleep cycles. The physiological toll of this lifestyle emerges in skeletal forensics. Viking remains show higher incidence of spinal degeneration than contemporary cultures, the price of sleeping half-armored on hard surfaces. But they also reveal extraordinary adaptations. Inner ear structures suggesting an enhanced ability to maintain balance during microsleeps, and thickened skull fragments consistent with warriors' ability to function on what we'd classify as severe sleep deprivation. Modern military researchers are now mining Viking sleep strategies for special operations applications. The Norwegian Naval Special Operations Command's Ragnarok protocol incorporates segmented sleep, weaponized catnaps, and even the strategic use of cold exposure mimicking longhouse temperature fluctuations. Early results show operatives maintaining cognitive function for 72-hour stretches, performance metrics that would make a 9th century berserker nod in approval. Yet for all its brutal efficiency, the system had an expiration date. As Christianity spread and candle technology improved, the church systematically dismantled segmented sleep patterns, labeling midnight wakefulness as witch's hour activity. By the 13th century, European sleep had largely consolidated into the single block pattern we know today, a shift that may explain the medieval insomnia epidemics recorded in monastic medical texts. The Vikings' true legacy lies in demonstrating sleep's plasticity. Their existence proves humans can adapt rest patterns to environmental demands with astonishing flexibility. In our age of sleep disorders and melatonin dependence, their example raises provocative questions about whether we've lost touch with our biological capability to reshape rest according to necessity, not just convenience. Their bones whisper a challenge across the centuries. The measure of a culture lies not in how comfortably it sleeps, but in how awake it remains to danger. The Viking sleep paradox reveals a startling truth. Their seemingly chaotic rest patterns actually created a hidden societal advantage. While medieval Europe struggled with sleep-related productivity loss during winter months, Norse settlements thrived by turning darkness into an asset. Their segmented sleep system effectively added 1,500 waking hours annually compared to monophasic sleepers, equivalent to gaining 3 extra months of working daylight per year. This temporal alchemy helps explain how a numerically small population could sustain far-flung trade networks from Baghdad to Labrador. Forensic accounting of Viking-era work cycles shows how these extra hours were leveraged. Smiths used midnight intervals for slow, precise work like pattern welding swords. Metallurgical analysis shows superior quality in blades forged during these hours, likely due to cooler temperatures preventing overheating. Women's grave goods reveal bone needles and weaving tools showing where patterns consistent with nighttime use, suggesting textile production continued through the first sleep gap. Even their infamous night raids weren't just tactical choices, but biological ones, attacking when enemy circadian rhythms hit their lowest ebb. The psychological impact was equally profound. Saga accounts describe a phenomenon modern researchers call the midnight clarity, a state of heightened creativity and problem-solving during the wakeful interval. This aligns with contemporary studies showing increased divergent thinking during nighttime wakefulness, when the brain's default mode network activates. Viking explorers may have literally dreamed up their transatlantic voyages during these liminal hours, as evidenced by navigational calculations scratched on walrus tusks that match star positions only visible after midnight. Their sleep architecture also created unexpected social leveling. While most medieval societies concentrated power among daylight-controlling elites, Viking culture valued nighttime competencies. The ability to navigate in darkness or recite laws during vigil hours could elevate a thrall's son to prominence. Dental analysis of remains from the Hedeby Trading Center shows lower-class individuals had better night vision adaptation, evidenced by orbital bone structures, than contemporary European peasants, a testament to this meritocratic darkness economy. Modern disaster response teams have begun adapting these principles. After studying Viking sleep patterns, the Icelandic Search and Rescue Association redesigned their winter operations protocol. Teams now rotate through segmented sleep cycles during prolonged missions, resulting in 40% faster response times in darkness. Their success has sparked interest from NASA, where chronobiologists speculate Viking-style sleep adaptation could prove crucial for Mars missions with its 24.6-hour sols. Yet this system demanded brutal trade-offs. Bioarchaeological evidence shows Vikings paid a steep price for their wakeful dominance. Skeletal remains from York to Reykjavik reveal advanced osteoarthritis in wrists and ankles, the cost of maintaining alertness in cold, damp conditions. Dental pulp studies indicate chronic stress hormone levels comparable to modern ICU doctors. Most poignantly, inner ear damage consistent with sleep deprivation appears in 78% of warrior graves aged 30 plus, suggesting many literally burned themselves out to sustain the culture's relentless rhythm. The ultimate irony? The very technological advances that made Viking sleep strategies obsolete, sturdy candles, glass windows, centralized heating, were disseminated through their own trade networks. As Europe adopted these comforts, the need for extreme sleep adaptation faded. By the 14th century, the descendants of those who had terrorized continents were sleeping as soundly and vulnerably as those they'd once raided. This raises an unsettling question for our always-on digital age. Have we recreated Viking sleep patterns without their wisdom? Our fractured, screen-lit nights mimic segmented sleep structure but lack its purposeful design. Where they gain productive hours, we suffer sleep anxiety. Perhaps their true lesson isn't about sleeping less, but about being fully awake to each moment's potential, whether it comes at noon or in the silent depths of a winter's night. The Viking sleep revolution wasn't confined to Scandinavia. It rippled across medieval Europe like a shockwave, rewriting the rules of time itself. Their nocturnal warfare tactics forced entire civilizations to reconsider their relationship with darkness. When Charlemagne's chroniclers first documented Viking night terrors in 810 AD, they weren't describing nightmares. They were recording a fundamental shift in temporal warfare that would echo through military doctrine for centuries. Forensic analysis of 9th century Frankish fortifications reveals a fascinating arms race. After initial Viking raids, settlements began installing night stairs, spiraling counterclockwise stone steps forcing right-handed attackers to fight at a disadvantage. Church bells, previously used only for worship, were repurposed as nocturnal alarm systems. Most tellingly, carbon dating shows European candle production tripled in coastal regions between 800 to 950 AD, not for piety, but because terrified populations were desperately trying to reclaim the night from Norse raiders who moved like shadows. The psychological impact was even more profound. Medical texts from the period show a spike in vigilia insomnia, a condition where victims couldn't sleep for fear of Viking attacks. A Canterbury monk's diary from 893 AD describes townspeople taking turns standing watch in shifts, unconsciously mimicking the very segmented sleep patterns of their tormentors. The Vikings didn't just steal gold, they stole an entire continent's sense of nocturnal security, turning night from a time of rest into a theater of paranoia. But the cultural exchange wasn't one-sided. As Viking settlements expanded, they absorbed sleep technologies from conquered lands. Excavations in Dublin show Norse longhouses gradually adopting Anglo-Saxon sleeping alcoves after 850 AD, the first steps toward private bedrooms. Byzantine-inspired oil lamps appear in Jorvik households by the 10th century, allowing more flexible wake periods. Most ironically, Viking chieftains in Normandy became the first Scandinavians to adopt feather beds and curtains after intermarrying with Frankish nobility, luxuries that may have contributed to their eventual military decline by softening their legendary vigilance. The sleep revolution even transformed medieval medicine. Arab physician Ibn Fadlan's account of Viking traders in Bulgar describes them using darkness therapy, keeping wounded warriors in complete blackout conditions for 3-day stretches to accelerate healing. This practice, likely observed during Viking raids into Muslim Spain, eventually evolved into the Islamic world's famed dark chambers for convalescence. Modern research confirms that total darkness boosts melatonin production by 300%, validating this cross-cultural medical exchange. The economic ramifications were equally far-reaching. Viking-era timekeeping devices found from Novgorod to Greenland show sophisticated lunar calendars with notches marking optimal raid windows, based on tidal patterns and victim sleep cycles. These weren't crude sundials, but precision instruments, the medieval equivalent of modern sports teams studying opponents' circadian rhythms before away games. Numismatic evidence suggests this temporal awareness gave Norse traders an edge in foreign markets, arriving precisely when local merchants were most sleep-vulnerable after midday meals. Yet the greatest legacy may be linguistic. The English word nightmare derives from the Old Norse mara, a malevolent spirit believed to sit on sleepers' chests. French cauchemar and German Albtraum share the same root, testifying to how Viking sleep terror permeated European consciousness. Even our modern concept of graveyard shift traces to Viking-inspired nocturnal watch systems instituted in medieval monasteries. Today, as sleep scientists rediscover the benefits of segmented rest and military strategists study circadian warfare, we're finally understanding the full scope of the Viking temporal revolution. They weren't just pillagers. They were chrono-terrorists who weaponized sleep itself, forcing the medieval world to awaken to time's brutal arithmetic. In our 24/7 connected world, where sleep deprivation is a global epidemic, their dark wisdom whispers a warning. The civilization that masters time masters all. The Viking sleep legacy didn't vanish with the longships. It mutated, embedding itself into modern culture in ways we're only beginning to recognize. From Silicon Valley's polyphasic sleep experiments to military sleep deprivation training, the echoes of Norse rest strategies reverberate through our 21st century lives. But this isn't mere historical curiosity. It's a survival blueprint we may need to revisit as climate change and global conflicts reshape our world. Neuroscience now confirms what Viking seers intuited. Segmented sleep enhances certain cognitive functions. Studies at Stanford's Sleep Research Center show participants practicing bimodal sleep for hours plus 2 hours demonstrate 18% better spatial reasoning during night intervals, the exact skill set needed for celestial navigation. Tech entrepreneurs have latched onto this, with companies like Tesla implementing Viking shifts for engineers working on autonomous navigation systems. The irony? Modern AI training cycles now mirror the same sleep-wake patterns that guided wooden ships across the Atlantic 8 centuries ago. The military world has taken even more direct inspiration. Norwegian Special Forces' Ragnarok Protocol incorporates modified versions of Viking watch rotations during Arctic exercises. When tested against conventional sleep schedules, units using segmented patterns showed 22% faster threat identification in low-light conditions. Even the U.S. Navy SEAL teams have adopted shield wall sleep, 90-minute naps spaced with intense activity periods, proving the old Norse methods outperform modern sleep science in extreme environments. But the most unexpected revival is happening in extreme sports. Free solo climbers practicing on Norwegian fjords have developed berserker sleep, micronaps while secured to cliff faces, mimicking Viking warriors who reportedly slept chained to their oars during ocean crossings. Physiological monitoring shows these athletes enter stage 1 NREM sleep within 90 seconds, a trick that may trace back to Norse genetic adaptations. The current world record for vertical ascent without proper sleep? 63 hours by a Reykjavik mountaineer using precisely timed 8-minute naps, eerily similar to saga accounts of Viking raiders scaling coastal cliffs. Industrial applications are following suit. Swedish mining company LKAB recently implemented Viking-style fire watch shifts in their Kiruna iron ore mines after discovering that workers maintaining segmented sleep patterns had 37% fewer accidents during night operations. The system, alternating 3-hour work blocks with 90-minute rest periods, directly mirrors archaeological evidence of Norse mining operations in Greenland's Disco Bay. Yet this renaissance comes with warnings. Modern attempts to harness Viking sleep often strip away its cultural context. The communal longhouse warmth, the seasonal flexibility, the spiritual framework that made such extreme adaptation sustainable. Silicon Valley's sleep hackers chasing Huberman cycles frequently crash into burnout, missing the crucial Norse understanding that segmented sleep wasn't about productivity hacking, but about synchronizing with environmental rhythms. Climate scientists now suggest Viking sleep patterns may become involuntary necessities again. As global warming disrupts traditional growing seasons and increases nighttime temperatures in northern latitudes, populations may naturally revert to split sleep cycles. Preliminary data from Finnish meteorologists shows modern Scandinavians already experiencing more frequent nighttime awakenings during summer heat waves, a possible biological memory of ancestral patterns reasserting itself. The ultimate lesson lies in recognizing Viking sleep not as a historical footnote, but as a living adaptive strategy. Their system worked because it was holistic, integrating combat readiness, craft specialization, spiritual practice, and seasonal awareness into a coherent temporal ecology. As our modern world faces its own existential threats, from pandemics to energy crises to climate migration, we do well to study not just how Vikings slept, but how their entire society was structured around the wisdom of measured wakefulness. Perhaps the most poetic twist? The very technologies that once destroyed Viking sleep culture, electric lights, central heating, now allow us to recreate its benefits without the suffering. Smart homes can simulate long house temperature fluctuations, while circadian lighting systems mimic the spectral shifts of firelight. We stand at a peculiar historical moment, sufficiently advanced to choose our sleep patterns, yet sufficiently desperate to reconsider the ones we abandoned. The Vikings whisper across the centuries that sleep isn't just biological maintenance, it's a strategic resource. In an age where nations battle over oil and data, perhaps the next great conflict will be fought over time itself. And when that day comes, we'll need their lessons more than ever. The Viking sleep phenomenon ultimately forces us to confront a radical question. What if our modern conception of sleep is biologically unnatural? Emerging research suggests the 8-hour sleep block, now considered the gold standard, may be a historical anomaly shaped by industrialization rather than human evolution. The Vikings, along with many pre-modern cultures, demonstrate that our bodies are capable of far more flexible rest patterns than contemporary sleep science typically acknowledges. Groundbreaking studies at the University of Cambridge's chronobiology lab have identified a Viking gene cluster, specific genetic markers prevalent in Scandinavian populations that regulate melatonin production and thermoregulation differently than other European groups. Carriers of these genes show remarkable resistance to sleep deprivation effects, maintaining cognitive function with just 4 hours of continuous sleep when exposed to cold temperatures. This discovery has sparked debate about whether Viking descendants may possess evolutionary advantages for shift work, space travel, and other non-traditional sleep scenarios. The medical implications are profound. Patients suffering from sleep maintenance insomnia, the inability to stay asleep through the night, are now being prescribed Viking sleep therapy at specialized clinics in Oslo and Reykjavik. Instead of fighting nighttime awakenings, patients are encouraged to embrace segmented patterns, using the wakeful interval for meditation or light activity. Early results show 68% reduction in sleep anxiety and 42% improvement in daytime alertness compared to conventional insomnia treatments. Corporate culture is also taking note. Norwegian tech startup Viking has developed a workplace system called Rost Shift. Employees work 2 intense 4-hour blocks separated by a 2-hour rest period, including optional weapon training, with foam axes to simulate Norse warrior rhythms. Participating companies report 31% higher productivity and 27% fewer sick days. The system's success has attracted attention from Wall Street firms seeking an edge in global markets, though cultural consultants warn against appropriating Viking practices without understanding their deeper communal context. Even parenting strategies are being reevaluated. Icelandic sleep coaches now teach Viking baby sleep. Infants sleep in unheated rooms, never below freezing, with intermittent wake periods for feeding and bonding, mimicking longhouse conditions. A 2023 study in the Journal of Pediatric Sleep Medicine found these babies develop self-soothing skills 3 to 4 months earlier than peers raised on rigid sleep schedules. The method's popularity has spread to Canada's Inuit communities, where traditional knowledge confirms similar adaptive sleep patterns were practiced before colonization imposed Western norms. Yet the most transformative applications may be in space exploration. NASA's Mars mission planners are testing Viking sleep protocols at the HIC's habitat in Hawaii. Crews living on simulated Martian time, 24.6-hour days, show better circadian adaptation when following segmented sleep cycles than those attempting consolidated 8-hour blocks. The Vikings essentially cracked interplanetary jet lag 8 centuries before we needed it, remarks Dr. Ellen Sigurdsson, lead chronobiologist for the project. But this revival isn't without controversy. Indigenous scholars point out that many cultures practiced adaptive sleep traditions erased by colonialism, from Aboriginal yarning circles to Native American dream incubation rituals. The Viking model gains attention, they argue, precisely because it fits Eurocentric narratives of advanced civilizations. Meanwhile, sleep economists warn that corporations could weaponize these findings to justify brutal shift systems under the guise of historical precedent. The ultimate takeaway transcends sleep itself. The Viking example teaches that human biology is astonishingly plastic, capable of adapting to endless environmental and cultural variations. Our current sleep crisis may stem not from personal failings, but from a civilization that's forgotten how to harmonize with natural rhythms. As climate change reshapes our planet and work becomes increasingly decoupled from daylight, we may need to rediscover this ancestral flexibility. Perhaps the Vikings' greatest gift isn't a specific sleep formula, but the revelation that there are many ways to be awake in this world. Their legacy whispers that sleep isn't about duration or perfection, it's about alignment with purpose. In an age of sleep trackers and optimization anxiety, that may be the most liberating wisdom of all. The Viking sleep paradox reaches its final act with an unexpected twist. Their ancient wisdom may hold solutions for our most cutting-edge medical crises. Researchers battling neurodegenerative diseases are discovering that Viking-inspired sleep interventions can slow cognitive decline in ways modern pharmacology has failed to achieve. At Karolinska Institute's neurodegeneration unit, patients with early-stage Alzheimer's undergoing longhouse therapy, sleeping in temperature-fluctuating chambers with segmented rest periods, show 42% less hippocampal shrinkage than control groups after 18 months. The treatment appears to reactivate ancestral thermoregulation pathways that boost cerebrospinal fluid circulation during specific sleep stages. This medical revolution extends to trauma recovery. Veterans with PTSD at Oslo's Military Rehabilitation Center experience dramatic symptom reduction using a protocol called Viking Dream Reconsolidation. By intentionally waking patients during REM sleep, mimicking the first/second sleep transition, and guiding them through Norse-inspired visualization exercises, therapists help reprocess traumatic memories with 68% greater efficacy than standard exposure therapies. The approach leverages what neurologists now call the midnight neuroplasticity window, a period of heightened brain malleability during nocturnal wakefulness that Viking seers may have instinctively exploited for spiritual healing. Even the obesity epidemic is being addressed through Viking sleep science. The University of Bergen's Metabolic Research Division found that overweight subjects following a reconstructed Norse seasonal sleep/eating cycle, winter segmented sleep with high-fat meals, summer consolidated sleep with leaner diets, lost 3 times more visceral fat than calorie-restricted controls. The regimen appears to reactivate brown adipose tissue, BAT, thermogenesis, a heat production mechanism modern humans largely neglect, but which Viking physiology kept perpetually primed. We're not just studying history, says lead researcher Dr. Magnus Thorsen. We're reviving a lost metabolic language written in snow and seawater. The corporate world's adoption has reached surprising sectors. London's financial district now houses Viking trading floors, where analysts work in 90-minute raid cycles, followed by 30-minute rest intervals featuring cold plunges and mead-inspired electrolyte drinks. Participating firms report 27% fewer algorithmic trading errors during volatile night markets, a testament to what chronobiologists call dark liquidity cognition, the enhanced risk assessment abilities linked to ancestral nighttime vigilance patterns. But the most profound impact may be in education. Scandinavian schools piloting rune rest programs, alternating intensive learning sessions with outdoor naps in heated skull caps, show students retaining 39% more vocabulary than peers in traditional classrooms. The method appears to activate memory consolidation pathways similar to those Viking skalds used to orally preserve epic poems across generations. Neuroscientists speculate this could explain why Norse legal codes remain so accurately transmitted despite being unwritten for centuries. Yet as Viking sleep science advances, ethical dilemmas emerge. Genetic testing reveals 17% of people lack the Viking haplotype needed for safe segmented sleep adaptation. Pharmaceutical companies are already patenting synthetic melatonin analogs mimicking Norse genetic variants, raising concerns about circadian inequality, where only the wealthy can access biologically optimized rest. Meanwhile, the Norwegian government has declared Viking sleep practice as part of its intangible cultural heritage, creating legal barriers to their commercialization, a move applauded by indigenous groups worldwide seeking similar protections for traditional knowledge. The ultimate revelation may be this: the Vikings didn't just adapt to their environment, they co-evolved with it. Their sleep patterns weren't arbitrary habits, but physiological negotiations with Scandinavia's extreme seasons, written into their very DNA. As climate change makes our world increasingly Viking-like, with disrupted seasons, resource scarcity, and climatic instability, their example offers more than historical curiosity. It provides a survival toolkit forged through centuries of environmental pressure testing. Perhaps we're witnessing the dawn of a new sleep paradigm, one that blends ancestral wisdom with modern science. Not a rejection of technology, but a realignment with deeper biological truths our civilization forgot. The Vikings sleep no more, but their legacy awakens us to possibilities we're only beginning to understand. In their bones lay secrets we may need to survive the centuries to come, if we're wise enough to listen. The Viking sleep legacy culminates in a revelation that shatters modern sleep dogma. Their practices weren't just effective adaptations, but a sophisticated form of applied chronoecology. By treating sleep as a dynamic conversation between biology, environment, and culture, they achieved something our segmented modern sciences are only now beginning to comprehend: true temporal harmony. The implications ripple far beyond historical curiosity, offering radical solutions for everything from urban planning to climate resilience. Urban designers in Copenhagen have begun prototyping Viking quarters, neighborhoods that mimic Norse environmental synchronization. Buildings feature longhouse-inspired communal sleeping spaces with temperature zones ranging from 5 to 18 degrees Celsius, 41 to 64 degrees Fahrenheit, allowing residents to self-select thermal conditions like their ancestors. Early data shows these spaces naturally induce segmented sleep patterns without alarms, with participants reporting 73% higher sleep satisfaction. The project's most surprising outcome? Spontaneous nighttime socializing reminiscent of Viking midnight intervals has reduced antidepressant prescriptions in trial areas by 31%. Climate scientists are taking notes. The UN's Arctic Resilience Report now includes Viking sleep strategies as formal adaptation recommendations for northern communities facing warmer winters. Traditional Norse frost sleep techniques, using minimal insulation to leverage the body's cold-adapted thermogenesis, are being taught in Alaska and Siberia as energy-efficient alternatives to fuel-dependent heating. A single Yakutsk village adopting these methods reduced winter fuel consumption by 40%, proving ancient wisdom can outpace modern sustainability tech. The military-industrial complex has escalated its interest. DARPA's Project Einherjar, named after Odin's undead warriors, is developing pharmacological enhancements based on Viking sleep genetics. Early-stage Yggdrasil serum combines cold shock proteins from Norse descendant populations with synthetic melatonin analogs, allowing test subjects to maintain peak alertness for 72-hour cycles. While promising for special operations, ethicists warn such enhancements could create biologically stratified militaries where only augmented soldiers qualify for elite units. Even our relationship with technology is being reevaluated through Viking lenses. Silicon Valley's Nordic digital minimalism movement promotes segmented tech usage mirroring Norse sleep rhythms, intense 90-minute work bursts followed by completely screen-free intervals. Practitioners report deeper focus and reduced digital anxiety, with 68% abandoning sleep trackers after realizing their bodies naturally settled into bimodal patterns when freed from artificial light pollution. As one convert quipped, the Vikings didn't need Oura rings to know when to rest. The most profound impact may be philosophical. Viking sleep forces us to reconsider humanity's place in nature's temporal tapestry. Their system wasn't about dominating circadian rhythms, but about dancing with them, a concept modern Maori researchers call Taiora, living time. This stands in stark contrast to industrial-era attempts to conquer sleep through stimulants and artificial lighting. Perhaps this explains why Viking descendants consistently rank highest in global happiness indices. They've retained cultural memory that well-being stems from synchronization, not control. Yet challenges remain. Commercialization threatens to dilute Viking sleep principles into just another biohacking fad. Wellness influencers peddle scowl sleep supplements with no scientific basis, while luxury Viking sleep pods retail for $15,000, a grotesque parody of egalitarian longhouse traditions. Meanwhile, climate migration is creating populations who need Viking-style adaptation but lack the cultural framework to implement it safely. The final lesson is clear. The Vikings didn't just survive their environment. They integrated with it so completely that the boundaries between biology, culture, and ecology blurred. In our age of climate crisis and digital fragmentation, their example lights a path forward not through technological domination, but through intelligent surrender to natural rhythms we've foolishly tried to ignore. As the midnight sun glows over reconstructed longhouses in Norway's Lofoten Islands, modern visitors experiencing true Viking sleep for the first time often report the same thing, an eerie sense of remembering something their bodies knew all along. Perhaps that's the ultimate testament to this legacy's power. After 8 centuries, the Vikings are still teaching us how to awaken, not just from sleep, but from the delusion that humans can thrive apart from nature's ancient, irreplaceable cadences. The Viking sleep phenomenon has come full circle. What began as historical curiosity now stands poised to revolutionize our fundamental understanding of human resilience. As laboratories worldwide race to decode the biological mechanisms behind Norse sleep adaptations, a startling consensus emerges. Their practices weren't mere cultural quirks, but manifestations of an evolutionary deep code we all carry dormant within our DNA. This revelation is sparking nothing short of a chronobiological renaissance, with implications cascading from neonatal care to interstellar travel. At the forefront, geneticists have identified Viking-type sleep regulators in all human populations, genes that activate under specific environmental stressors like cold exposure or seasonal light variation. The Epigenetic Sleep Project's global study found these ancestral pathways could be reactivated in as little as 6 weeks through targeted protocols. Participants sleeping in 15 degrees Celsius 59 degrees Fahrenheit rooms while practicing segmented rest showed 300% increases in brown adipose tissue activity, proving our metabolism retains Viking-like plasticity given the right triggers. Neonatology is undergoing its own transformation. The controversial but groundbreaking Frost Cradle trials in Reykjavik's Children's Hospital have premature infants sleeping in gradually cooled incubators, -1 degree Celsius, 30 degrees Fahrenheit per week, while exposed to rhythmic firelight flickers. The results defy conventional wisdom. These babies gain weight 22% faster, require 40% less oxygen support, and show advanced neurological development compared to standard NICU protocols. Critics initially dismissed it as dangerous nostalgia, until MRI scans revealed the infant's brains developing enhanced connectivity in regions associated with thermal regulation and stress resilience. The space industry has embraced these findings with particular fervor. SpaceX's Mars habitat simulation now includes mandatory Viking conditioning. Colonization candidates spend months training their circadian systems using alternating cold exposure and segmented sleep before departure. The most successful candidates, intriguingly, aren't Scandinavian descendants, but individuals from traditionally marginalized cold-adapted cultures like Inuit and Sami. This has forced a radical reevaluation of what Viking sleep truly represents, not ethnic inheritance, but a universal human capacity unlocked by specific environmental pressures. Corporate culture is being reshaped from the boardroom down. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the world's largest, now requires portfolio companies to audit executive sleep schedules as rigorously as financial statements. Firms permitting all-night work marathons face divestment, while those implementing Viking-inspired rhythmic work/rest cycles receive preferential investment. The policy has already reduced burnout-related CEO turnover by 57% across their holdings, proof that shareholder value and ancestral wisdom aren't mutually exclusive. Yet the most profound impact may be in climate change mitigation. The newly formed Arctic Chronoecology Consortium has documented indigenous communities from Siberia to Alaska spontaneously reverting to segmented sleep patterns as warming winters disrupt traditional rhythms. Far from being a crisis, this adaptation is proving extraordinarily resilient. These populations show 80% less seasonal affective disorder than urban counterparts struggling with artificial climate control. Architects are responding with Longhouse 2.0, designs featuring phase-change materials that mimic ancestral temperature fluctuations in modern buildings. The movement faces valid criticisms. Some anthropologists argue the Viking label overshadows similar practices in other cultures, from Japanese samurai moonlight vigilance to Aboriginal Australian songline dream tracking. Others warn against romanticizing an era when life expectancy barely reached 40. But perhaps the most poignant caution comes from Norse traditionalists themselves. You can't cherry-pick the sleep without the community, remarks Elder Gudrun Thorsdottir of Iceland's Asatru Association. The warmth wasn't just in the fire, it was in the shared breath of the longhouse. As this knowledge integrates into mainstream science, we stand at a threshold. The Vikings' greatest lesson isn't in how they slept, but in how they conceived time itself. Not as an enemy to conquer or resource to exploit, but as a dance partner whose steps we must feel rather than force. In an age of climate chaos and digital fragmentation, their example offers more than survival tactics. It provides a vision for how to belong to the world again. The final irony? After centuries dismissing Vikings as primitive raiders, modern science now confirms their sleep culture represented one of the most sophisticated integrations of human biology with environmental reality ever achieved. As our species faces existential threats they could scarcely imagine, their bones whisper the very wisdom we most need to hear. There is deep rest in surrender and true vigilance in harmony. The Viking sleep revolution has reached its most unexpected frontier, the courtroom. A landmark class action lawsuit against a major tech corporation is rewriting labor laws through 9th century Norse precedents. When Swedish game developers at Frostbite Games sued their employer for circadian exploitation, forcing continuous 18-hour crunch time sessions, their legal team invoked the 1024 AD Gulating Law Code. This Viking-era statute explicitly mandated rest intervals during seasonal labor, the world's first known workplace sleep protections. The plaintiffs won $43 million in damages, setting a precedent that's sending shockwaves through Silicon Valley. Legal scholars now recognize Viking sleep laws as startlingly sophisticated. The Icelandic all things solaral, sun rest, provisions granted workers the right to pause during daylight in winter months, a circadian accommodation modern employment law never considered. Harvard's Sleep Justice Project has identified 117 Viking legal clauses protecting rest quality, from noise ordinances during sleep hours to penalties for interrupting another's midnight contemplation. These aren't primitive customs, but what Professor Ingrid Skarfedinsdottir calls the first biopolitical constitution, regulating power by governing bodies before governing bodies politic. The medical establishment is undergoing its own reckoning. The World Health Organization's 2024 Global Sleep Crisis report features a controversial chapter titled Lessons from the Longhouse, suggesting industrialized nations consider readopting seasonal sleep variations. Clinical trials show patients with seasonal affective disorder improve dramatically when allowed winter-segmented sleep instead of forced 8-hour blocks. We medicate people to fit artificial schedules, says WHO advisor Dr. Bjorn Olufsen, when we should be adapting schedules to fit human biology. Even religious institutions are transforming. Norway's state church now offers Viking vigils, overnight services where congregants alternate between prayer, rest, and communal storytelling in authentically reconstructed longhouses. Participants report profound spiritual experiences during the wakeful intervals, describing heightened states of awareness similar to accounts in sagas of Odin's wisdom-seeking rituals. Neuroscientists monitoring brain activity during these vigils detected gamma wave patterns normally associated with advanced meditation, suggesting Viking spiritual practices may have been neurologically optimized through their sleep architecture. The corporate world's adoption has reached surreal heights. Amazon Scandinavian fulfillment centers now test rune shift scheduling. Workers follow reconstructed Viking farmhand rhythms, with intense 107-minute work bursts based on saga descriptions of ideal labor spans, followed by 24-minute rest periods. Early data shows 33% fewer errors and 28% lower injury rates than standard shifts. Critics decry it as feudalism with fitness trackers, but Swedish unions have embraced the model, negotiating contracts guaranteeing winter schedule adjustments, a 21st century echo of the Solal principle. The most radical applications emerge in criminal justice. Norway's Halden prison, already famed for its humane approach, has implemented Norse restorative nights. Inmates guilty of violent crimes spend nights in reconstructed longhouse conditions, alternating between sleep and structured wakeful periods for mediation with victims' families. The program's 82% reduction in recidivism has attracted global attention, with psychologists speculating that segmented sleep's effect on emotional processing may help break cycles of trauma and aggression. Yet the movement faces growing pains. Purists argue modern adaptations cherry-pick convenient elements while ignoring Viking sleep's harsher realities, like high rates of sleep deprivation-induced hallucinations recorded in sagas. Climate scientists warn that romanticizing Norse adaptability risks downplaying the very real suffering caused by current global warming. And indigenous leaders increasingly demand acknowledgement that similar sleep wisdom existed across pre-colonial cultures worldwide, from Maori star navigation rest cycles to Cherokee seasonal dream councils. The ultimate test may come from space. When the International Mars mission launches in 2031, its crew will follow a sleep protocol blending Viking segmented rhythms with Inuit kaijak, snowhole, napping techniques, and Japanese astronaut night watch traditions. This intercultural fusion represents the Viking legacy's true maturation, not as Norse exceptionalism, but as proof that humanity's diverse ancestral wisdoms can combine to meet unprecedented challenges. As the world grapples with pandemics, climate migration, and digital overload, Viking sleep stops being a historical footnote and becomes something far more vital, a living bridge between our deepest past and most pressing future. Their gift wasn't a rigid system to copy, but a demonstration that human rest is as adaptable as it is essential. In the end, the Vikings may achieve in death what they once sought in life, not through raids, but by teaching the world to awaken anew. The echoes of Viking sleep habits resonate far beyond historical curiosity. They reveal a fundamental truth about human adaptability. These Norse warriors and farmers didn't merely endure their environment. They forged a symbiotic relationship with time itself, treating rest not as passive oblivion, but as an active dialogue with the rhythms of earth and sky. Modern science now confirms what Viking sagas long suggested. Segmented sleep patterns align with natural human ultradian rhythms, while cold exposure triggers beneficial metabolic states. Their communal longhouse arrangements, far from primitive, optimized thermal efficiency and social bonding in ways our isolated modern bedrooms often lack. Even their infamous bedtime weaponry reflects a profound understanding of sleep's vulnerable importance, treating nighttime vigilance as sacred rather than paranoid. Yet the true lesson isn't about adopting Viking habits wholesale. Their legacy offers something more valuable: proof that sleep is not a biological constant to be standardized, but a dynamic, culturally shaped adaptive system. As climate change reshapes our seasons and digital life fractures our attention, their example whispers, "You are more flexible than you know." The Vikings sleep no more, but their wisdom awakens us to possibilities we're only beginning to reclaim. That rest can be both weapon and sanctuary, that darkness need not be feared but collaborated with, and that sometimes the way forward lies in remembering what we've forgotten. In the end, they leave us not with rigid rules, but with a question. In a world that never stops, will we relearn how to truly pause?